Hello, everyone. Thank you, Atlanta, for your very interesting videos. Hello, San Diego, and hello, virtual team. This is Chicago calling. We're all ready set to go to give you a whole bunch of very interesting proposals. And we're going to start with our first presenter now.
Thank you. We present to you Coastal HubNet, an ecosystem for coastal research. We envision this as linked research hubs built around regions and science themes that include a research agenda organized by scalable research frameworks, connected to a data hub, and providing for research development, community integration, data management, visualization, and global impact. And this is the first of 3 presentations, and we focus on regional and thematic hubs. In a nutshell, we want to have these hubs enable coordinated convergent science and engineering projects. We want to serve the region's needs. We want to maintain a sustained presence along the coastal region. And we want to generate knowledge with a global impact. Diagrammatically, you can see from the figure on the left-hand side of the screen that we have a central data hub surrounded by regional thematic hubs, each of which is underlain by a scalable coastal research framework that supports multiple research programs. We want to use these hubs to synthesize existing data and knowledge. We want to bring transdisciplinary teams together to develop and produce research. We want to use this framework to manage and build a responsive research program. And we want to carry out integrated theoretical, observational, and modeling efforts to help solve pressing coastal issues. We want to have a broad knowledge transfer program, and we want to be informed by an experienced steering committee. Diagrammatically, each of these hubs, we recognize that ecology, community and culture, and the built and natural environments will provide vital context for what we do. And the themes that we choose to embrace might include barrier coasts, rocky coasts, river deltas, estuaries, lakes, tropical islands, and others. We envision a strong, specific incentives for scientist stakeholders. We know that social science and just listening can help us find what people need. We know that trust and understanding are essential. We want everyone at the table, so we want to be inclusive, and we want to have an integrated approach for our research with no silos. And we finally want to use this innovation to steer coastal solutions worldwide. We know that seeking coordination and synergies among diverse projects can bring broader participation and exciting interdisciplinary results, like use of traditional ecological knowledge to enhance coastal habitat mapping. The most technically sound research plan can fail if you don't have community support. An example of this would be ongoing river diversions in the Louisiana coast. And finally, we recognize that scientists will benefit from access to resources, infrastructure, and new ideas from this network. Thank you.
Hi, we recommend a scalable research framework that ties into what these guys just presented, the research and thematic data hubs at different levels. So this is a tiered research grant program consisting of 3 components. The first component is a seed proposal. The purpose of the seed proposal is to provide resources for gathering community input, community partner input to help drive the research questions and priorities of the main research. The second component would be a core proposal, which drives the main leg of the research at the local and regional scale and is transdisciplinary. The main outputs of this program would be discovery research partnered with community solutions, and then several core research programs would come together or result in a synthesis proposal program or synthesis proposal at the national and global scale, where the output is a system-level understanding with national-scale solutions. And a key element is that the 3 components are tied together by an annual program-level or CoPe-level workshop, and the 3 together combine to be sort of a decadal-level program. So the workshop, the key element of the workshop is that it brings all of the partners together and is centered around the community partnership. So the workshop would provide resources to allow community partners to attend and interact and provide input, and then PIs of all of the funded grant components would also attend. So this would promote transparency not only at the grant level, but at the program level for all stakeholders and partners, and would help to initiate collaboration for the synthesis level proposals. And also sharing of solutions in science. So the delivered impact and value of this model is that it will promote the partnership between fundamental research and application development of solutions, for example, decision support tools for community partners. And it allows local initiatives and local ideas to scale up to providing understanding and shared solutions at the global and national level. And it allows place-based projects make it feasible to conduct transdisciplinary and community-engaged work at multiple levels. Thank you.
Hello all. We, along with our colleagues in the previous two groups, see CoPe working best as sort of a tiered or nested approach. And our component of this is the data hub. And what we're envisioning here with the data hub is a centralized hub or location that serves to catalog and house both original data that's coming out of the regional hubs and out of original research, as also pointing to external links to original research and also pointing to external secondary data sources. And this hub we're envisioning would be open and available to the public and therefore needs to be accessible and user-friendly, and also have metadata built into it, as well as a very robust visualization component. And our reasoning for this is that this would increase data competence in terms of collection, also just the basics of comparability and standardization, data collection, and the data itself. And by interacting with regional and thematic hubs as a clearinghouse, it puts a centralized location that makes it much more accessible to various publics. In doing that, the publics that we're serving would be wide. It would also include government agencies as well as the research community. And to sort of have that be workable, we envision this as having a sort of the agile development approach sort of built into how this is designed from the get-go, as well as have it be structured so that the various publics can not only access, but can also analyze and contribute results, so that the public in general, a very broad public, has co-ownership of the hub itself as well as the data and the analyses that are in it, because frankly we found that people value what they've helped build. The impacts of this in terms of just aggregating the data and having metadata there that provides this sort of essential context for all of what's going on, and having that metadata will allow for sort of a web of data connectivity, which will allow us to see how all the pieces that are represented in this room all kind of fit together, as well as ensuring that it can answer real-world questions and engage both individual citizens in the questions they're interested in, but also facilitate citizen science. And this will hopefully drive new research and application type questions. It'll help us identify gaps by having everything in front of us. You can see the spokes and the gaps between them. The visualization component would hopefully let folks highlight dissonance in the data and encourage further testing, so see where the problems might be, and also amplify what's already out there by using data that has not been analyzed, because you now have ways to connect all of it. We've begun to sort of think a little bit about how this might be structured, and the staffing would need to be robust. It would need a data librarian with the support staff, folks doing digital security, and very importantly, science translators and designers to work together to make this all sort of usable to folks. And I think importantly, having a stakeholder advisory board and constant feedback loop with the regional thematic hubs to keep the whole thing grounded. And of course, this is a long-term commitment. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eric Ellis. I'm with the Great Lakes Commission, and this is our team of people who worked on a vision for CoPe hubs. We see this as the hubs as a regional network that has 4 key functions: to integrate research, to engage stakeholders, to provide data management for all this research that's going on, and to also provide a robust education and training program and systems for the people who are, for partners and stakeholders. If you look at these key functions here, the first one, research integration, we want to have a convergence of the basic science that leads to applied research and also on the ground, informs on the ground management. We also want to have, we don't want to be replicating things that are already out there. We want to make sure that all the work that happens at these regional networks converges with existing initiatives and with an overall goal of actionable science. We want to make sure there's robust stakeholder engagement, participation through citizen science, having stakeholders involved from the ground up with even developing proposals, engaging all the communities at the regional level and including them in the discussions with researchers and with students and as part of a team of stakeholders with an overall goal of building trust and capacity at the regional level. The other two key functions of the regional hubs, one is providing data management and research infrastructure. We envision a centralized hub that would be the primary data management, that would provide the primary data management and manage our virtual and online presence. And we would also have shared data and equipment that would be utilized by hub stakeholders, leading to more efficient research. And again, we want to have a strong education and training component that trains researchers, has a Hub Fellow program, holds annual conferences, and has a lot of student training and involvement. And this would enable a cohort of sustainable, effective science translators that could take this message to policyholders, put it in the language that they understand and the general public. Finally, our overall model, again, is centralized on a core hub that works in the built environment, natural ecosystems, and also involves human dynamics. The four, apparently bluish, letters there, that is our four key functions that all of these different regional hubs that you can see here would focus on. And there would be a strong thematic focus and place-based focus for these different areas. And we're all set. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Mark Barnes, Morgan State University, and I'm here to deliver a message from my team. If NSF wants to broader participation to drive equitable and inclusive scientific research for coastlines and people, then carousels are needed in places where they can be or make the most difference. Carousel is an acronym for Coastal Action Research Organizations utilizing scientific equity liaisons. Its function or its design is to be continuous and also creative so as to prevent jams. Jams in research design, jams in engaging underrepresented communities in research and so forth. And the work is done through a model, incubator model, that has sort of several drivers, if you will, incubators, the cross-community incubator. These are sort of the problem identifiers, an advisory board who attempts to identify sort of the research questions and hypotheses, as well as those who will form sort of the responses given the challenges that are presented. Our guiding philosophy is hubs, not clubs. Again, that's meant to promote balanced and fair inclusion across research fields and also across various coastline communities. They are rotating, they are diverse in membership. However, the most important perhaps aspect of this entire concept is the need for evaluation to ensure that ethical considerations are given towards the management and also the dissemination of information and also engagement of different stakeholders. And so we see this as generating a new culture for coastal research, problem solving, and of course, action in coastlines and the peoples that reside there and work. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, our vision for a hub is that it is based on places as exemplars of issues that are important. You can see some of the issues identified here. You could add your own issues as umbrella issues. The location of the hub is intentionally left blank. You can fill in where you think those issues can be best addressed as a result of the issue being manifested best in that location, and stakeholders in that location working for the longest time and doing the best job. We want to stress that we're talking about a physical entity. We're not talking about a virtual hub. And I've got a few items identified here in red because I don't have time to address all of them in detail. But we do want to stress, like all hubs should, address regional and national constituents as well. But here we can leverage NSF resources for exploratory research, not just exploratory, that implies we're starting from the very beginning. No, we're building on work that's already been done here because this is where these issues are best manifested. And it will serve as good centers for outreach and education as a result of all the work that's been done there. And facilitate communication with stakeholders and end users. And why can they do that? Because if you look at the top, it capitalizes on the rich history of local knowledge. They've been dealing with these issues for a long time. And the partnerships have already been arranged. They can be improved, but are good examples of what people can do elsewhere when faced with the same issues. They are good demonstration areas for education programs, such as our EU sites. The field-based workshops can perhaps be best accomplished here. We've got thematic support for a national audience. These are the places that are best used to document what's being done. And like anywhere else, it's probably a good idea to ensure that there are no walls built around these hubs. We've got core facilitators for equitable access to these hubs identified there. Some other presentations may have better ideas or more specific ideas for that. What's the value? Synthesis role for framework questions about these issues, connecting communities with national networks. Every hub should do that. National databases could be here. We coordinate the research agenda on the issues that cause the hub to be located here in the first place. Will it work? Sure, build on the best practices of other hubs and other organizations, such as Park Service Cooperative Research Units, Sea Grant. National Estuarine Research Program is an example of a location where investigations are done, and that's what we're after, specific locations.
All right. We're proposing the creation of a CoPe Academy. Our idea is to create a research support function for CoPe teams that are engaging in community-based research through their work. and also to create a long-term social research program to evaluate, is the training working the way that we hope it'll work. So in a nutshell, the reasoning behind this proposal is that while it is vitally important for scientists to be able to communicate well their scientific knowledge to decision makers, that's necessary but not sufficient. They really need to understand, if they want their information to be useful to and used by decision makers, they need to understand the decision-making context that the information would be used in. So we're proposing a training program that would combine training in value systems, humanities. Value debates often drive decision-making processes, the legal context that the decision is being made in, the governmental planning process, and also relevant multidisciplinary topics that are relevant to the team. The idea is these trainings would then be tailored, and we would create the training program and then also start studying, is this working? So 2 parts, training program, I already talked about this a little bit. So we'll be developing process-related training programs. What's the context that the decision will be taking place in? Topical training sessions, coastal engineering for Ecologists 101, coastal ecology for engineers 101, so folks understand a little bit better the nature of the multidisciplinary work, tailored to the particulars of where the research team is going to be working, ideally bringing in community members so that they're participating in creating the training, but also taking the training, so they're getting that, that development. The idea is the training would be co-developed by education experts, probably in a central location, added on by topical experts and local members to help build out that training program. The research program then consists of figuring out, is this working? Is this kind of training actually helping researchers to improve coastal systems and coastal community outcomes on the ground? Is engaging in this training and working with these communities actually working to improve their own basic research programs? Is it actually working to pull all of this together to create new convergent knowledge that we haven't been able to create before? The research program would be conducted by trainers, education experts, program evaluators who are working with the scientists to collaborate and bring it all together. The key to make this happen are all the feedback loops that are involved. We're training, we're evaluating, is it working? We're getting information from the scientists, we're feeding that back to them, we're looking at how it's affecting outcomes on the ground, pulling that back together. Ideally, because it's a 2-pronged program, we're going to have rigorously tested research on the methods that are being deployed to provide this training, and ideally we'll have better outcomes in coastal settings because of this interaction between community and scientist. Did I get it? We're done.
I have a big, powerful, and mighty team with me today. Are we ready? Game on? Okay. Engaged, not embedded. My name is Heidi Roop, and I have had the great privilege to develop a brain trust with my new closest colleagues here that we're all departing from one another today, but we have been thinking deeply, and I hope we'll continue this conversation, and our call to all of you is to think about how it is that hubs, regardless of their shape or form or nature, serve as transformative forces that integrate people and science through long-term engagement. We're not here to suggest that science and people are separate, but rather thinking intentionally about the fact that the science that gets done is the science that gets funded, and it's always people behind the science. So how is it that we then engage people more deeply in the process of science from the beginning? Not just a peripheral piece, but rather an integrative whole to what we're doing. And that starts with thinking about what problems that are actually needing to be solved. It also requires that we think very intentionally about the terms that we use. What is long term? What does it mean to be part of a community? What is engagement, in fact? And how is it not merely tangential, aspirational, or an afterthought? These are all things that we've thought about and have written about, and we have some key defining characteristics that we think would help to come to common understanding and flexible terminology when we think about these important and fundamental words that many of us have been using in our presentations. So if diverse perspectives are at the heart of transformative and meaningful solutions to coastal challenges, we need to think about flexibility. How is it that the science and the questions that we're asking can adapt and be nimble to the needs of everyone involved? How is it we build connectivity with the systems and programs that already exist, both within other mission agencies as well as in the NSF network? How is it that we define and acknowledge different expertise and bring them to the fore in an equitable way? And how do we build trust? We acknowledge that building trust and effective partnerships takes time. So, oh no. We need weather-resistant funding. A strong foundation for long-term engagement also requires that we have long-term funding that helps lead to transformational solutions. And with that, we suggest that there is strong connectivity in our CoPe, that's not a logo, symbology here, but the idea is that we start to integrate these systems more closely, and that in itself will lead to long-term engagement.
Hello. So, NSF has the expectation to support rigorous research. The CoPe says yes, that, and we place value on applying the same rigor to the processes that achieve special CoPe goals. I swear we did not talk with the group just in front of us. But we propose that the hub take on the and by applying and institutionalizing the same rigorous standards and expectations that are already applied to basic research to the and. A dedicated project manager ensures that the right people are engaged at the right time, in the right sequence, to shepherd a project along, ensuring the success and increasing the value and impact of NSF's engagement. So over the past few days, we've heard about suggestions of these core groups of functions: communications, facilitation, supporting the NSF researchers, helping NSF connect, outreach, engagement, really making sure that all of these things are built in at the beginning. So, but to do that, challenges do exist. So stovepipes exist, and they prevent holistic views of the system. But even if we don't have those stovepipes and we can see the whole system, sometimes we're not even speaking the same language between our various disciplines and across our communities. And even if we are speaking that same language, oftentimes there's voices missing. So we meet that challenge with what we called hub magic. And the hubs deploy skilled professionals to neutrally facilitate the CoPe goals, honoring these difficult aspirations. Research has always been a key focus. So CoPe, recognizing that the integration and translation and broad participation are equally important. We can do it. We understand that this is difficult. So what we are proposing, that there's tools of professionals that we can deploy who have expertise and that we can learn through as a whole community in order to meet these big goals that we're looking for. Okay. So NSF has charged the hubs to connect people and science. So we propose that there are professionals dedicated to facilitating the process who will drive those actions and create opportunities to elevate that and that we're all talking about today. And then maximizing the impact and investment of the NSF funds. So hubs support the professionals who make the and happen. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Diane. I'm joined with my colleagues Britt, Hugger, Daphne, Julie, and Tom. If you take nothing else from this presentation today, please know that what we're proposing is a series of thematic hubs that benefit and coalesce in thematic areas using hypothesis-driven research proposals. I think a recent example of this is the Landsat 8 image that I'm showing you on the screen. We see too many examples where extreme events affect the way we live, the way we work, and the way our ecosystems exist. We would like to propose a mechanism for which we can use science and community engagement and federal agencies to bring together to choose these very critical topical areas. We think that the value in our approach is to foster transdisciplinary focused research. We want to use what NSF has done really well with hypothesis-driven research, but connect us across departments and directorates and programs. We'd like to enable place-based or theme-based research. We would like to respond to emerging needs of our society and our communities, and we want to facilitate the engagements with these community and federal partners so that we can ultimately lead to the co-production of knowledge which will converge on ideas and thoughts and perspectives that change the way we live. The framework that we're proposing is that we'll have a CoPe steering hub. From the steering hub, we will organize a series of planning grants, planning workshops, where people will come together from diverse backgrounds. And over those workshops, you will identify some sort of and coalesce around a thematic area. We're calling that the hublet. The hublet may have a few sub-themes, a place-based theme, and it will provide support for workshops amongst the broader team, logistics, stakeholder decisions, citizen science, and educational opportunities. Individual or small groups of researchers may then propose hypothesis-driven research to a particular directorate that feeds into a theme. We should note that each hublet will serve a multiple of directorates. An example is here. Imagine the image that we showed on the first page. Imagine that Landsat 8 image of the coastal Carolinas. And as a community, we decide extreme events are critical to transforming our coastal environments. And we identify that there are at least two possible sub-themes, urban developments and barrier islands. And we propose hypothesis-driven research for each of those. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Jake, and together with Leslie and Paul, we're going to present on broadening community in our concept of broadening participation in coastal systems science. So we all agree that broadening participation allows for co-production of knowledge and allows for the highest quality scientific research. It also allows us to use this bidirectional exchange of ideas to translate the utilization of this research for maximal societal impact. However, what we're here to argue is that coastal stakeholders extend beyond the coastline itself. Private industries and private interests like oil companies and fishing industries affect national and regional economies, and these public and private entities own a majority of the coastal land itself. They have environmental resources, they have financial resources, and they have political capital that can be leveraged by scientists to further our mission of improving quality of coastal science. So when we're thinking about the full set of coastal stakeholders in the scientific process, we've been thinking a lot about just the local residents, people who are living on the coast itself, but it really includes this entire list of interests that extend into neighboring regions and across the nation. So not only are these local interests making up a full set of stakeholders, the local residents who work in these industries and are economically dependent on these industries, they're all involved and they need to be considered as stakeholders. So our value proposition is that science-driven economic and social well-being will be through community development that's sustainable, and it'll have regional and national reach. So these stakeholders have resources that scientists can leverage for societal impact that includes money, which can be used without the bureaucratic hurdles that perhaps some government agencies have. They also have proprietary data and local knowledge of their local systems that will expand the reach. They also have political capital, which can enable them to advocate for policy to promote ecosystem health. Scientists, on the other hand, provide synthesis and interpretation to optimize decision-making by these stakeholders. And so our evidence for this kind of is exemplified by this Texas grocery store company, HEB, that following Hurricane Harvey was able to deploy within 24 hours to provide hot meals and water to local residents who were impacted by disasters. They were able to provide friendly faces of neighbors and provided humanitarian aid that has a powerful message. Corporate well-being for this company and for many of these companies is tied to the health and prosperity of the community. So that's our pitch. Thank you.
Hi, we are a team about broadening participation. The team members are Dave Basco here and Margaret Nudi. She has to leave last night. And Ayumi, myself, Ayumi Fujisaki Manome. Here is the thinker by Rodan. Let's think about increasing social justice by quantifying resilience with broad community participation. So the idea is to increase social justice by inviting underrepresented communities to participate and be properly evaluated for flooding vulnerabilities. And while doing so, engage citizen scientists and citizen engineers in quantifying increased resilience to coastal flooding. We recommend resilience quantification because current practice only evaluates risks in terms of monetary unit. And we also recommend to include broader number of citizens in the development of the method in order to represent the maximum number of people. As a value, resilience quantification focuses on functionality, and this is more effective rather than risk calculation that focuses on form. And as another value, as a result of inclusive method, social justice will be improved. We recommend combined approaches because using both risk and resilience metrics gives a better method for decision making. Another reason is the resilience quantification provides the missing link between engineering and economic risk analysis and social and environmental analysis of resilience. Here's a little graphic showing the evaluation, not only based on risk as a benefit and cost ratio, but also based on resilience quantified that gives a better evaluation of mitigation and adaptation. Now, we are coming back to the thinker by Rodan. So let's think about increasing social justice by quantifying resilience with broad community participation and call it a day. Thank you.
Good morning. We have a straightforward but potentially transformative recommendation to make, which is to add an equity lens in review of proposals for the Coastline and People program. So our specific recommendation is to add an equity criterion to NSF merit review. We think that this has potential to address well established by the research uneven vulnerabilities in coastlines, that it can shift what research questions are asked, what research questions are funded, and who potentially benefits from research discovery. We also think that this is a means to make basic science research a conduit between all of these terrific hub proposals that have been put forward and the local communities who live along the coast. Some of the ways that this could be implemented include some form of community review that's complementary to peer review, explicit impact estimates in proposals that look at things like the costs and benefits to vulnerable populations, some forecasting of long-term potential outcomes of research discoveries, and really thinking about what the phenomenon under study, how it affects certain people, places, and communities. We think that letters of support from communities would be essential for proposals to show that there's buy-in at the local level for research to be conducted. And we think that a plan for translation of research findings would be essential so that we could see that scientists and communities were ready to work together to make the findings applicable at the local level along the coast. We see this as having some really positive impacts, including bridging what research calls the climate gap between sort of scientific and technical understanding of things like climate change and local experiential knowledge of living along coastlines. We see basic science repositioned as a really exciting foundation for future application of coastline interventions. And because we see research as creating a pathway for community input between hubs and communities, we see a longer-term potential of potential co-production of knowledge between scientists and communities. The evidence for this, we see that this addresses some kind of baked-in structural and implicit biases that exist in the current proposal process. We see this as expanding creativity through the proposal of new research questions. We see this as expanding the reach of NSF to scientists who work in and work with and are from marginalized communities, and that this creates a virtuous cycle of creativity and inclusion in coastline research. And finally, that this adding an equity lens lays the groundwork for application to address inequities and injustices along the coast. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So there are two of us, so we decided that we were going to double dip. We have two broadening participation goals. We are going to stem the leaky pipeline by connecting gig scientists with underserved communities. So we see two problems that on the face of them appear to be unrelated. We have a known leaky STEM pipeline. So often there are early career women who take a break from their families or take a break from their careers to spend time with their families and have known two body problems. There are extended postdocs who have difficulty then breaking into the academic market. There are people who have completed degrees and want to transition into industry, public policy, or other fields but lack the training and expertise in that sector, or people with limitations and disabilities that require remote work. On the other hand, we have underserved communities who may lack any connection to expert groups and don't currently have access to the body of scientific knowledge. They don't have the funds to hire these people who could actually help them and have shorter term or smaller scale problems. Okay, so we have two people with a problem, let's put them together. Let's put them together. Our idea is to have a clearinghouse for our leaky STEM scientists with a high degree of expertise but no permanent academic position to solicit gigs. This would also then be a venue for communities, businesses, and academic research groups with short-term needs to reach out as a contracting service and match with credible experts. What does NSF provide in this scenario? They are the virtual network infrastructure that is part of the hub. They provide the credibility and vetting to say, these are the people who we say can be included in our expert database. We know that if you talk to them, you're going to be talking to a smart person. These reviewers who decide this credibility and vetting may be both academic and professional. So what's our funding mechanism? Outside groups can post bids, individual scientists can reach out and say, here is my expertise and my rates, and NSF can provide grants to expand projects, filling in holes in teams, and reach out to, say, undergraduate serving institutions to provide mentorship models for undergrad students. So what are the benefits? We see two key benefits here. On the science side, we are providing a transitional science workforce that is targeted at improving retention of known underrepresented groups in STEM. These are groups that we already know that we're losing through the pipeline, and this is a way that we can bring them back into a workforce, filling things like resume gaps, to ensure that these are not people that we are losing to the scientific enterprise. For underrepresented communities, this is a forum that allows these groups access to the scientific community that they wouldn't otherwise have. So rather than trying to reinvent the wheel with every new scientific project to say, now we don't know how to reach out to underserved communities again, let's just ask them what they need so they can post and say, hey, this is what I need help with, come talk to us. Thank you.
So hi, everyone. The project that we have in mind is titled Moving from Participation to Partnerships, Approach to Coastal Community Science. And the idea that we have concerns the topic of broadening participation, but more than anything, we want to retitle that and reframe that as broadening partnerships for a particular kind of reason. The issue that we're confronting here is that often we might hear that there isn't enough community buy-in, that people aren't necessarily in the local communities becoming engaged in our projects. So we wanted to devise a framework that would both facilitate the way that hubs assist both communities and scientists come together to develop projects that do two things at the same time and overcome certain dichotomies that we've seen here over the last couple of days. One of the dichotomies is the difference that we make between basic research and applied research, and also maybe a third partition being community priorities. And the idea that we have is that we want to develop a new way of doing research. So the specific recommendation that we have is, number one, that NSF sponsor and invite the submission of proposals that have creative ways of developing a way of doing science that simultaneously does two things that may seem many times to be completely disparate. One is addressing community-based needs and community-defined needs, in seeing how scientific methods and scientific knowledge making can, in one way or another, come into relationship or into conversation with those self-defined needs, and on the other hand, also address the needs of scientists to produce what we call basic research. And over the course of conversations I've had here during the last couple of days, I've heard people think that those two are separate things, but we want to encourage creativity on the part of scientists and community members. And the other specific recommendation is that the hub's purpose then becomes to connect scientists and community members. Either communities have self-defined needs that they feel they need assistance with, and they feel that perhaps the scientific community could help them, or you have scientists that have very specific locations, specific places where they want to do research, but they're also wondering how they can have a broader impact. And then the purpose of the hub is to provide a mechanism for these scientists and community leaders and community members to come together. And the purpose and the role of NSF is to make sure that the hubs become a means of facilitating the granting of proposals that, again, creatively broach these two conditions and needs. So I just wanted to give a quick example, and a quick example of that would be the Lower 9th Ward. Here we have Bayou Bienvenu, which was an area that was heavily deforested because of Army Corps of Engineers canal projects that changed salinity levels and destroyed the cypress forest that existed there. Post-Katrina, there was a very big Research One university that will go unmentioned that came in and wanted to do a project on the restoration of the ecological system, but something that they kept on complaining about was that there was very little community participation, community buy-in. And what was interesting for me as a sociocultural anthropologist was that community members kept on saying, we care about the bayou, we certainly want the bayou to be restored, but you don't understand that for us right now, what's most important is that our neighbors come back. We have very different priorities, and to a certain extent, your scientific emphasis on salinity levels is almost insulting to us because it seems like that you don't care about what's important to us. And what is important then is to develop projects that could kill two birds with one stone. How do you develop a scientific project that would encourage or involve resident participation and employment that would actually help bring people back? So see, these two seemingly disparate concerns, how can you bring them together in one proposal? And those would be the proposals I would think would broaden participation. And I'm done.
Right, hello, and this is our group, and we are all here today because I think we all know that studying coastlines and people presents a grand challenge. And the next two presentations are going to be looking at synergistic ways in which we can address this challenge. In order to do this, we need to be studying the coevolution of physical, ecological, and human systems in the coastal environment at multiple scales and temporal and time scales and spatial scales. Why is this a grand challenge? So we have over 100 years of knowledge in studying individual systems, but when we put these systems together, we really don't know how interactions across different systems are going to lead to emergent outcomes, especially in the face of uncertainty. In the figure that you see here, we see processes that are color-coded that range from time scales of hours to centuries and spatial scales of meters to potentially hundreds of kilometers. Right? And what we need is to understand how these processes interact. What we also see are the different scales at which ecological, human, and geophysical processes interact that can guide the way we study feedbacks in these systems. So how can we start to do this? We propose a framework that allows us to address basic science gaps in understanding interactions in human and natural systems at these different scales. And this will need to be informed by a number of disciplines coming together and working in close collaboration to inform advancements both within fields and across fields. What we also propose is to develop a hierarchy of models that are empirically grounded and validated at these different time scales, and that leverage existing resources that we already have and that we've already built. Why is all this important? This could be transformative in aiding the way we make informed decisions as well as understanding cascading impacts of what happens today at these different spatial and temporal scales. What this also means is that we're going to have to radically rethink the way we train our next generation of researchers. We're going to need programs that are somehow embedded, that draw on these natural synergies across different disciplines as part of the core curriculum itself. And why is all this important? It's probably obvious to all of us here. We're just looking at the way in which Hurricane Florence has unfolded over the past 2 weeks. And the immediate impacts in North Carolina are probably obvious, but the way in which we respond, where people move, and how we rebuild the coast, as well as when and where we're going to make policy decisions, are going to have significant feedbacks across both coastal landscapes and the people that live in those landscapes, and how that's going to change over much longer time scales and spatial scales. And that's why we need this sort of a broad approach to addressing these questions. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Kelly Dunning. I'm from the University of Texas Marine Science Institute in the National Estuarine Research Reserve, Mission Aransas. I'm here presenting on behalf of my colleagues here. And what we're proposing today as a research opportunity is the regional spatial framework to support coupled human-natural systems for decision-making on the coasts. So the first slide that I have up here is to basically illustrate the point that all coastal stakeholders face hazards. What you're looking at is an actual image of the University of Texas Marine Science Institute smashed to pieces after Hurricane Harvey hit us about a year ago. And to sort of illustrate the severity of it, we were only allowed in our offices about 2 weeks ago, so that's about a year later. These types of hazards, like Harvey or other more long-term hazards, impact social, economic, and ecological systems. And what we're in need of are tools for decision makers that allow us to better understand the linked social, economic, and ecological systems that are impacted by these types of drivers. Our specific recommendation is a framework for spatial models of socio-ecological systems. These are coupled human and natural systems, And what we're proposing are models that inform decision-making across scales. If you have a look at the figure that Dr. Lee's included from his own work, you can see the gridded interface that we're proposing to sort of make these models adjustable. Think of it like a zoom function where you can zoom into the local scale or zoom out to an entire region. The reason that these models are so impactful in our view is that they're both stakeholder and scenario driven. This would allow stakeholders to provide inputs on the specific drivers that matter to them as coastal decision makers in policy in order to reduce uncertainty over actual real-world policy decisions or planning decisions. Inputs would include social, ecological, and economic data, plus a range of scenarios. Outputs would include sort of quantified values of ecosystem services. So for example, if you're looking at the planning repercussions of a shoreline management plan that would eradicate wetlands, how would those values change with different wetland cover scenarios, and how would those react to things like nutrient influx and hurricanes hitting the coast, so these types of things. The value of our model is threefold. First, the geospatial framework would act as a decision-making tool for real-life policymakers and planners. Second, there are a lot of ecosystem service models out there, but what we're proposing are models that incorporate both long-run and short-term drivers. And the third, the hub framework could store and act as a focal point for data and models. The last thing that I wanted to say is that this has been created with an eye to pre-existing ecosystem service work out there, such as TEEB and the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. Thanks.
Just a few hours ago, there was a magnitude 7.5 earthquake on the island of Sulawesi in Indonesia that's already claimed lives with a tsunami. That occurred without warning, just as the massive earthquake in Anchorage in 1964. Mount Rainier erupted last in 1894. A future eruption of Mount Rainier is potentially one of the greatest disasters facing the lower 48, with inundation from above by mud flows into significant amounts of coastal Seattle and Tacoma. Landslides on unstable slopes, both offshore and on land, threaten infrastructure at sea and on coastal regions. Our focus here are on catastrophic events that are driven by tectonic and geological processes. Our goals are new arrays that cross the shoreline, forecasts that are based on physics, and response that includes risk management and community resiliency. The focus is on geo events here because unlike catastrophic storm events, this problem is still deeply data limited and physics model limited. For example, most earthquake models involve unstable stick slip that happen with no precursors. But new data that's come about, as on the top panel, shows that 2 weeks prior to a magnitude 8 earthquake, there was microseismicity that occurred. This is giving us new hope that there are precursory phenomena potentially before earthquakes and tsunami that may be predictable. Volcanic eruptions have a host of precursory events, but how do we use them in a physics-based model? Most models for volcanic hazards involve maps that integrate past events, but we need to be moving towards physics-based models that have probabilities attached to them. The hazard science needs to go hand in hand with catastrophe modeling and community resilience. There's two examples here. One is the Haywired scenario developed by the USGS based on a Hayward fault situation of scientifically realistic earthquakes, feeding that into a financial risk assessment, and then feeding that information back into the USGS outcomes model. The bottom image shows novel engineering solutions, such as a tsunami vertical escape shelter in an elementary school in Washington State, and that these partnerships between academia, the reinsurance industry, and engineering are needed desperately to move forward. So we have 4 recommendations. The first are instrumentation, new arrays on the seafloor crossing the coastline. The other are academic and agency partnerships that help bridge monitoring efforts, that's the mission of agencies, and development of new research questions and instrumentation that come from academia. We also need to embed graduate students in this activity and citizen scientists who can provide data that we can't otherwise. Finally, the science of and integration with risk management is needed to include sustained conversations and knowledge of the baseline state and validated models. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'd like to talk about a research component that hopefully would be endemic to all of the CoPe research goals, and it kind of falls in line with the modeling that we were just talking about in some of the previous talks as well. And that's the idea. If we're going to make better projections of what's going to happen in the future, we're going to have to understand what has happened in the past and think about leveraging different sorts of data sets in order to make our predictions better and more useful for communities as we communicate them, right? So here's a picture if you're in the north and it's the top side of the picture, and it's 400 years ago. You can make some predictions about measurements, about coastal change. But what happens here is very different because we need to think about what happens with people as well as changes that happen. And we have records of these changes. We have historical records and geological records that can help teach us about what is going on. Right? So here's our idea is that here's some coastal variable on the y-axis over time. And if we use just the instrumental record, which is increasing now thanks to the data explosion and other exciting things that are going on, we can make some prediction about the future with some uncertainty that might be actually greater than we think. But because it's limited in time, how much information we have, we can improve this by adding more data. And that data goes back spanning different time scales as well. And the example here is Hurricane Sandy, which is, if you use just the instrumental data, is a 1 in 1,000 year storm. But if you extract further back and add just one data point, which is a high water level in the 1800s, suddenly it becomes a 200-year storm, and it becomes an event that is a bit more precedented and a bit more expected, and it can be used by the community to understand what they need to be ready for, even in a pre-climate change world, and then we have to add increased risk as well. Right, so we can think about different types of data, historical data, and we can think about things like the shorelines that we use, but there's other information that we can access, such as demographic information, economic information, how people developed as well. We can then go back to pre-human disturbance and think about events like the grand accidental experiments we've conducted upon the landscape that can help us understand how these landscapes operated better. And then going back in time, we can find times when sea level was rising at rates that are precedented now, and see how coastal landforms and coastal environments changed in those situations as well. Right, so the idea here is to think about data in many ways and think about extending data beyond what's just in the instrumental record in order to help advise and communicate with the communities as well. And think about traditional and non-traditional types of data about what's happened in the past to help us forecast the future, to help us understand not only what might happen in the future, but the uncertainty going towards the future. And that by taking historical precedent, right, and improving our expert knowledge, we can take the little girl on the shoreline, right, and we can inform her, right, that she maybe is not using her resources in the best way based upon what we know about how the coastal system is operating. Right, thank you.
Hello, I'm Carol Considine I'm an engineer, and with me I have Roger Harvey. He's a chemist. We're both from Old Dominion University, and I have Sid Mitra with me. He's an oceanographer from East Carolina University. Our research project is titled Coastal Adaptation Research, and we're really focused on the grand challenge of coastal adaptation. We need to understand the timescales of human and natural systems adaptation to coastal perturbations, and we also need to understand the factors that will allow adaptation of these systems to be aligned in time and space. Adaptation to human systems is difficult both in the short term and the long term, And human migration is going to be an essential component if we're going to have successful adaptation. So we need to understand how the natural system will adapt, what those impacts will be on our human systems, and how we can incentivize adaptation responses so that we can provide opportunities to minimize risk and build that resilience. Literature has established that coastal adaptation investment pays multiples in comparison to recovery and rebuilding. So in the United States, we spend billions of dollars on recovery costs, and that does not include the impact to human people. So we looked at 3 coastal events, and if you look at this graph here, the orange represents the recovery costs, the white number above the bars is the loss of life, and the green would be the comparison to what adaptive costs would be if it was completed prior to the event. So Irene cost $16 billion and caused 48 deaths. Sandy was $65 billion with 159 deaths. And Matthew was $6 billion with 128 deaths. So using a cost-benefit ratio of 1 to 5 for every $1 spent on adaptation, we save $5 in recovery. We can see that we can really have a cost-effective approach to implement adaptation early and be successful in climate change. So in closing, I think it's, we really feel like we need to understand the adaptation process of both the human and natural systems. And with that understanding, we can build resilience, minimize cost, and minimize risk. Thank you.
Hello. So our group took on what we see as the grand challenge, and in many ways we're going to echo themes that you've just heard about, and that we think that resilience is really the big challenge and the big buzzword that we need to be addressing in the coastal environment. So very quickly, what we see as the challenge is that we need to develop a multidisciplinary, collaborative approach to developing holistic solutions to build the resilience in the coastal environment. And so 2 key words in this statement I want to point out: holistic. So that gets at the coupled systems challenge that we have in the coastal environment. We have physics, we have biology, we have the built environment, we have the socioeconomic factors that cause people to move around and in and out of the coastal environment, as well as to value the services coming out of this system. But we also feel like there's a collaborative approach that's needed. And so collaboration among scientists, much like we have here in the room, but also collaboration between scientists and stakeholders. So we have 2 broad categories of recommendations. We want to talk about and nurture convergent research and identifying the really big research challenges and interesting science that needs to go on in this system. So trying to understand this as a coupled system, understanding the dynamics across spatial and temporal scales, not only the spatial and temporal scales in the physical system, but also the hierarchical organizational scales in the human system that govern how we make decisions. We want to quantify the ecosystem responses to environmental change in order to inform and forward-looking long-range decision-making, because that's the real challenge. Is that many of the decisions, much as we heard in the previous talk, focus on short-term decisions, whereas we know that with the trends in the environment, we need to be making longer-term decisions. But we also need to have sustained engagement with stakeholders. And this really gets at trying to understand, what does resilience mean? There's a human element even to just defining the problem. And so working with coastal communities to understand what are their resilience goals, what are the things that they value, what are the strategies that are going to hold on to that value for the long term is an important part of this work. So we see the impacts of this work as advancing the understanding of this complex system in the coastal environment, so nurturing this convergent basic understanding, clarifying the goals around adaptation, so understanding where do we want to go, what do we hope to accomplish, and developing clear metrics that will allow us to determine whether we're meeting those goals. And really the goal here is to provide a foundation for science-based decision-making that can incorporate trends and projections and to help communities to be able to make decisions based on those trends and projections. Thank you.
Okay, the title of my presentation is Social Dynamics for Flood Hazard Zone Development and Retreat, or an alternative title would be How Can Physical Scientists, Engineers, Social Scientists, and Planners collaborate to develop a better understanding of housing market imperfections and their remedies. I've identified 6 research questions. The theme of the first one is really what are the stakeholders involved in the housing market? They can be identified as developers whose goal is to make a profit by providing housing. The second group is homeowners who want a variety of amenities at minimum cost. And the third group of stakeholders is local government who sides with the developers in trying to provide a broader economic base for their communities, but also with the homeowners in trying to deal with the aftermath of any kinds of problems that arise from coastal hazards and disasters. The second research question, the theme is what are the kinds of policies, tools, and strategies that are available to government in trying to reconcile 2 objectives. One is siding with the developers and siding with the homeowners in addressing market imperfections. There are a variety of tools, the most commonly known of which are zoning regulations and building codes. There are a variety of others that can be described as incentives, regulations, and risk communication. The third theme is information flows. What are the different stakeholders' perceptions of the credibility of different information sources? How do the stakeholders differ in their access to information channels? How do they differ in their interpretation of common expressions such as 100-year floodplain that are often misinterpreted? And how do they differ in their characteristics such as their beliefs about how and when government should be involved in the housing market? The fourth theme is regards how do planners try to draw lines on maps to separate incompatible land uses. Under the best of circumstances, it's a plausible fiction that they can draw very thin, shiny lines. As you project farther and farther into the future, those lines get to be fuzzier and fuzzier. How can that be reconciled? The fifth is how do you, what are some of the additional questions, the analyses that need to be addressed? And then finally, what are floodplain occupants' perceptions of the ways that they will reconcile their futures? Thank you.
Good afternoon now, everyone. I'm Lindsay Williams, and I want to thank my colleagues here on our team. I'm going to be presenting about this topic of addressing structural barriers to diversity in science, and in particular, coastal science is what we're talking about here. So I do want to acknowledge that science is broader than academia, but in this particular presentation, we're focused on the role that academia plays in training scientists. So our idea in a nutshell, we're looking at coastal communities as racially, ethnically, and socioeconomically diverse. And so we have 2 photos here thinking of very different coastal systems. And so we need to think about how to best serve those populations. And one important piece of that is to reflect those populations. If we don't reflect those populations, there are various barriers to engagement or limitations to the creativity of solutions that we might be able to come up with. We also see structural barriers that are in place in participating in academic science development, and so those are hard barriers like how we review students or access to funding, but also soft barriers to things like implicit bias or perceptions of what it is to be a scientist. We see those barriers present at multiple levels, so whether or not this broad pool of potential scientists at the K through 12 level are sort of future scientists, people that are already a little bit in the pipeline in undergraduate or graduate, the folks that might be in postdocs or junior faculty position who are coming up in the scientific ranks, as well as the broad community of those who are scientists. And what we want to do here is really draw on the learning and social sciences and in particular around the diversity, equity, access, and inclusion literature to make sure that we are setting up students, faculty, and staff for success. And so doing that, we see CoPe can play a very important role, in particularly on these hubs and sort of bringing together the existing literature. And I'm going to keep going. It's coming back. Excellent. So two potential mechanisms that we can look at to address these barriers. We looked at the cohort training model that CoPe and NSF could use to enhance existing awareness of programs like Includes or Advance, and then connect them to other efforts, especially for junior faculty, and also looking at cohort training for aspiring scientists. And so this is making sure that students aren't isolated in the experiences that they might be having, particularly as they're funded through CoPe, as well as making sure that CoPe has a strong focus on making sure internships are paid and that there are scholarships and that we're not introducing new barriers. In particular, the impact of this will be hopefully to advance development of innovative and integrated solutions that are societally relevant. And one of the other impacts is that this model can be adapted to any approach that the hubs might take. And then lastly, we want to make sure that our scientific community reflects the communities that we're serving. The messenger is just as important as the message, and so we move from that foggy image through the sea and the previous image to a lighthouse here, helping lead us the way through these barriers, and so that we can have a more diverse scientific community in the future. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for these wonderful presentations and ideas that were presented today. We really appreciate all the time that the participants took and all the brain power that you used to think really deeply about coastlines and people. We also really appreciate NOAA Innovation's facilitation of the collective brain power in this room. And so now, Coastlines and People, Chicago is out.